afternoon, everyone. Oh, no, it's still morning, isn't it? This just felt like a whole day already. So good morning. I'm Dr. Geronda Miller-Bryant, Assistant Director of Engaged Scholarship at UVA's Maxine Classroom Women's Center. We're an academic support unit serving under the Office of the Provost. Louder? Okay. Sure. I can start over. I'm Dr. Geronda Miller-Bryant, Assistant Director of Engaged Scholarship at UVA's Maxine Classroom Women's Center. It's an academic support unit serving under the Provost's office. And we basically have services for students, staff, faculty, and community members. We have a counseling center, and we run a robust internship program. First, I want to say thank you to Kalela Williams, the director of the Festival of the Book, for inviting us to partner with her on this event. And I personally cannot express how happy it makes me to know that we are here on this good spring day, having this conversation with these particular human beings. We don't have an infinite amount of time, so I will dive right into the introductions of our moderator, Shelley Wood. Shelley is actually going to be introducing the guest. Shelley is a licensed clinical social worker and a native of Charlottesville, Virginia, and currently works as a therapist at the Women's Initiative. She strives to empower women in their healing journey to reach their full potential and an overall sense of well-being. Shelley is a therapist who values working out in the community and collaborating with other organizations to provide much-needed services. She is also a member of the Central Virginia Clinicians of Color Network, which seeks to increase our community's capacity to provide culturally responsive mental health care. Shelley Wood.
All right, good morning. As Geronda said, my name is Shelley Wood. I'm a therapist. Sorry. I am a therapist with the Women's Initiative. We are a nonprofit in Charlottesville. We provide individual counseling to women and gender-expansive folks who otherwise wouldn't have access. We also provide social support and education and outreach to the community. I am excited to be in conversation with our authors today, Dr. Psyche Williams-Forson and Ms. Clarkisha Kent, at this year's 2023 Virginia Festival of the Book event, Food and Blackness. Thank you to our partnership with the UVA Maxine Placer Lynn Women's Center. The Virginia Festival of the Book is a program of Virginia Humanities, statewide organization whose mission is to connect people and ideas to explore the human experience. In a few minutes, we'll introduce our panelists. Well, I will. But first, please silence your cell phones. And we encourage you to be aware of your space and look for the exits. We have a bookseller on site who is to my right. And then the authors will be signing after the discussion to my left. We encourage you to meet these great authors and get your book signed. We'd also like to give a special thanks to our event venue, the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center, and Pearl Island. And we'd like to thank the Virginia Festival of the Book's premier sponsor, the Joseph and Robert Cornell Memorial Foundation. And of course, your support is also welcome. Many festival events are free of charge, but not free to produce, so your support helps. You can text and give by texting VA Book, all lowercase, all one word, to 56651, or use one of the QR codes designated for giving around the room. We also have another important QR code for surveys. It's through your feedback that we're able to offer this festival year after year. And if you don't know what a QR code is or how to use it, there are volunteers here who can help. And now I'd like to welcome our authors. Our first author is Dr. Psyche Williams-Forson, a professor and chair at the University of Maryland's Department of American Studies. She's one of America's leading thinkers about food, race, and culture. Dr. Williams-Forson is the author of several publications on the subject, including 3 books, one of these books being the award-winning Building Houses Out of Chicken Legs, Black Women, Food, and Power. Also Taking Food Public, Redefining Foodways in a Changing World, a co-edited collection. And her most recent Eating While Black, Food Shaming and Race in America. Dr. Williams-Forson is an alum of the University of Virginia, BA in English, African American Studies, and Women's Studies. She received her master's and PhD from the University of Maryland, College Park, and she is also a member of the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Ms. Clarkisha Kent is a Nigerian-American writer, culture critic, former columnist, and author, committed to telling inclusive stories via unique viewpoints, and she's fascinated with using storytelling and cultural criticism, not as a way to overcome or transcend her unique identities as a fat, bisexual, and disabled Black African woman, but as a way to explore them, celebrate them, affirm them, and most importantly, normalize them, and make the world safe enough for people who share them to exist. Her writing has been featured in outlets like Entertainment Weekly, Essence, Galdem, Paper, BET, Huffington Post, MTV News, The Root, and more. She's also the creator of the hashtag The Kent Test, a media litmus test designed to evaluate the quality of representation that exists for Black women and women of color in film and other media. So, without further ado, everyone please welcome our author. Just maybe read pieces from your book, tell us about your book, any points you want to make, and just share anything you want to share.
Hey y'all, so I'm Clarkisha. It's lovely to see all of your wonderful faces. So my book is called Fat Off, Fat On, a Big Bitch Manifesto. I named it that one on purpose because, you know, fat phobia, though it's a delicate topic, it is something where it technically is in your face, right? So I like to give it a little punchy title, but for me, the book is mainly about teaching that fat phobia is very sinister. People kind of reduce it to name calling, which is a very elementary understanding of fat phobia. Fat phobia is a very oppressive system, just like racism, just like misogyny, homophobia. We can really keep going, but yeah, there are far-reaching effects of fat phobia that can affect your health outcomes. There are doctors who will not do their job properly for you if you walk in and they see that you're fat. They're just like, okay, you know, right? It can affect your job prospects. People will pass you up for promotions if they see that you're fat, depending on the bias of your boss, right? It affects how you can get clothes. It's perfectly acceptable for stores to not carry your sizes if you're fat, and you just have to be okay with it, which is not okay, so you shouldn't be okay with it. So things of that nature. So I use my personal stories in Fat Off, Fat On to illustrate exactly how sinister fat phobia is, especially if you're Black. And the origins of fat phobia do come from anti-Blackness and racism. So yeah, that's kind of the skinny on the book. So I'm going to read a passage from the chapter My Skinny Summer. And in that chapter, I talk about being in high school and obsessively exercising, and also having a very restrictive diet because I wanted to just lose 45 pounds in 2 or 3 months, which obviously is not very healthy. But you know, I'm a 14, 15-year-old girl. I want to be skinny, so I'm I don't really care about like the consequences of losing weight that fast. So I'm going to read a brief passage and then I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Psyche. As far as good shit goes, I walked into my junior year of high school 45 pounds lighter and seemingly more confident, and with a semi-new wardrobe. AKA, what I could sneak past the school district standard attire code without getting sent to the principal's office. Unlike in most movies where there's some big makeover sequence that morphs into an even bigger reveal, the shock in my transformation wasn't necessarily instantaneous or even obvious. But the shock did eventually come. Actually, maybe shock is the wrong word. It'd probably be more accurate to say change. Yes, as every fat, formerly fat, or fat-adjacent person can attest to, there was a stark change in how I was treated from the moment my classmates caught onto the fact that I was now 45 pounds lighter. Granted, my friends hit me with the, "You look different," and kept it moving. But everyone else, not so much. Suddenly I went from invisible man status to straight look man, but naked sexy, or as sexy as an attention-starved 16-year-old could be. Hypervisibility was the word of the year, and your girl was it. There was no more passive-aggressive, thinly veiled insults about my weight. I was the assumed picture of health. Every dude who I was mildly attracted to finally registered my existence. My crush of the hour, which I'll not get into for now, because I'm still quite embarrassed about it, started bumping into me more. And this was surprisingly tame stuff. The really intense stuff came when I was eventually pulled to the side by a handful of female classmates who then asked the wrong question. How'd you do it? This seems like a fairly innocuous question, until you remember that I lost 45 pounds in only 3 months. And every time this was asked, I've contemplated lamenting about an entire summer of meal prepping that included endless bottles of water, English muffins, brown rice, green grapes, fiber 1 bars, low-fat or calorie-free ice cream, fucking slim fast drinks, the occasional piece of black or honey ham, chicken, avocados before they were 20 bucks a pop. Thank you, white people. With this diet stretching into my junior year. This, of course, all resulted in me shitting my friends out, but that was a mere distraction in terms of where I wanted my body to go. I also greatly considered revealing how I obsessively committed to hours upon hours of exercise, with my chosen torture methods being the elliptical and I guess contemporary dance, all powered by a 2 to 3 hour long playlist on my Zoom, or was it my iPod? I know you think that hours upon hours cooked is an exaggeration, but it wasn't. I would lock myself away in the garage, which was sweltering with shit, and even threw up occasionally, only if my stomach hurt. Doing these things for what seemed like an eternity, and I would only emerge to confirm I had indeed tortured myself for the day in my exercise journal and do my homework. As in, exercise literally took up as much, if not more, time as it took to complete the homework for my 900 million AP classes. It's a wonder how I managed to stay an A+ student. There was also the fact that my obsession with what I was putting in my body, how I was exerting my body, and the kind of duress my brain was under trying to hold it all together, GPA included, dictated that I had to take a break somewhere, that I needed slack somewhere. And so during lunchtime, I'd be sure to gorge myself on every terrible and empty calorie thing I could find, mainly pizza and cheese sticks and brownies and fries, with my chosen Minute Maid drink of the hour, and then turn around and add an extra hour on the elliptical at hyper speed. And really, I'm glossing over the exercise thing in a half-assed attempt to not dissociate. Because if I were being 100% honest, I'd tell you that the exercise thing got bad. Like, I mean really bad. Like, hella bad. When we talk about eating disorders and body dysmorphia presently, there's always a hyper-focus on calorie counting or how these diseases drastically change our relationships with food. But there's not as much, at least in my experience, focus on what people who suffer through these diseases put themselves through where physical exertion is This hyperfixation on exercise as a rushed means of weight loss is now referred to as a particular kind of purging disorder. But it's not something that was commonly discussed when I was going through all this shit. And in terms of physical exertion, rather than exercise being the relaxing and stress-relieving activity that it has the potential to be, it becomes a disciplinary thing, a form of punishment. A toxic knee-jerk response as a result of surpassing your calorie count for the day, even if it's literally by 1 fucking calorie. Okay. Because a calorie indicates failure, lack of discipline, and single-handedly could be the difference between you, me, hanging on to your, my, fragile, skinny body, and you, me, reverting to your, my, formerly fat, unglory, health. Even meeting the calorie count was still a failure. The goal was to always be under said goal. There needed to always be a deficit, and in my mind, that was only achievable by fanatical physical punishment. Which is to say, if anyone reading this is in denial that excessive exercise falls into the disordered eating category, it's time to wake up. Because just because you're not bending over a toilet with a finger in your mouth or inhaling everything in sight after long stretches of no eating does not somehow make you better. Of course, this is all a shit ton to tell some unassuming 16-year-old girl who's staring at you with wide eyes, thinking you're going to recommend some wholesome food and exercise tips. So I always opted to tell them something like, drink some more water, or cut down on meat if you can. And both things were technically true and didn't require me to divulge that what I now know was disordered eating and body dysmorphia, or divulge the fact that food and exercise have quite literally taken over my life. You may be tempted to ask me if it was worth it. And of course, the correct or expected thing to say would be to say no, especially looking back and reflecting on how it still factors into my body image and body awareness today. Like, I still don't have a very healthy relationship with food, and will often try to avoid it entirely to circumvent unnecessary freakouts. But that would be a lie, because at the time, it was worth it.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, in the back? All right, great. I like that we were paired together because what I heard Clarkisha talking about is, in a sense, body shaming of oneself, food shaming in practice. And many of those things I've also experienced, so of course I know exactly what you're talking about. So Eating While Black, Food Shaming and Race in America is based off really my first book, Building Houses Out of Chicken Legs, Black Women Food is Power, which actually has at its core Gordonsville, Virginia, just down the road, where I talk about the women who sold chicken at the trains. That's what people say, right? But I want to tell the story very quickly because Building Houses Out of Chicken Legs was my doctoral thesis, and I started out exploring the stereotype between Black people and fried chicken, because at the time that I was working on the dissertation, Tiger Woods had won the Masters for the first time. And you know, when you win the Masters, not only do you get the Company Green Jacket and all the accolades, but you also apparently get to choose what you want for your celebratory meal. And so one of his fellow golfers had said to him, don't choose fried chicken, collard greens, or whatever the hell those you people eat. And so that was one of the things that happened, and that year also, during March Madness, KFC, which is part of the larger conglomerate with Taco Bell and Pizza Hut, won the advertising for that year. And so they had a hip-hop colonel doing a fashionable dance in the Black community, which was the Cabbage Patch. And there was a basketball, and then there was what sounded like a Black voiceover. And it seemed to me in 2000, this was, and I was like, well, we still associating Black people with chicken. Well, obviously we are, because many years later when President Obama first won the presidency, not only did we start seeing all of these advertisements for Obama chicken and so forth, but there was a postcard circulating that had watermelons on the South Lawn as the plant that would be cultivated. So all of this shaming was going on around Black people and chicken, and so, you know, back then we didn't have Google, we had the internet, so I interneted Black people and chicken, and one of the things that came up were a number of different insidious and derogatory images of Black people and chicken, all on eBay, postcards, things like coon chicken egg, just you name it. You had sheet music, you had all kinds of ephemera, right? Postcards, greeting cards, and so. So I started out exploring that stereotype, and then I got to a point where I got tired of seeing Black people victimized, right, or assumed to be victims. And I ended up down here in Gordonsville. I won't tell that story right now. And in going to their historical society, which was one room, I saw an interview that had been given in the Orange County Orange Times, and it was by a woman named Miss Bella Winston, and she said, "My mother built our house out of chicken legs. The first house burned down and she rebuilt it." And I said, that's the story that needs to be told, is how Black women build houses out of chicken legs. We care less about the stereotype, right? Because stereotypes aren't true. They're somewhat true, but they're not the complete story, right? And so as I started traveling to talk about building houses, a lot of changes were happening in the food world. We were returning to gardening. We started to see more and more calls for organic and local eating. And refrigeration was coming into dollar stores, Dollar Tree, Family Dollar. So I began to ask, who's eating at the dollar store? And so that was one of the questions asked. But the other thing that was happening is there was a lot of moralizing going on around eating. I eat clean. You know, I'm a pescatarian, I'm a vegetarian, I'm a vegan, I'm a this, I'm a that. Everybody wanted a label, right? And one of the things that was happening tremendously was folks were coming up to me, how can we put a garden in this, that, and the other community so they can eat healthier? I'm like, first of all, I have no idea, I don't know that community, right? And you shouldn't be asking me, you should be asking the people in the community. Two, what do you mean healthy? How do you define healthy? Right? How are we defining health? And so the combination of all of these things that were going on led me to question why Black folks are still being surveilled for just living, right, in the 21st century. Why do people feel like our food cultures need to be policed? Why are we being compared to the Mediterranean diet, right? Why are we not taking into consideration people's various genetics, et cetera, that determine how, when, and why people eat various foods? What is this one-size-fits-all model? We know the BMI is not even an accurate assessment, right? So I'll stop there because there was a passage I'll read, but I'm going to do it midway or toward the end of our conversation, and I think it will make more sense. Thank you.
Letting authors know I never would have read these two books together, but there's so much overlap and connection. And so I'm also glad that both of you are here at the same time. Can you discuss how in your books you mentioned the internalization of trauma for Black individuals and rooted in the sense that something is wrong with us rather than existing in a society rooted in white supremacy and belief? And I know, Psyche, you mentioned the skewed room and skewed chairs and Clarkisha, you mentioned in a part of the book that instead of thinking, oh, this world is effed up, you internalize that and said, I need to fix me. So the two mentioned how that thread runs.
Okay, so trauma is very much a part of the discussion that I have here in Eating About Black. One of the first incidents that helped me think about trauma was Hurricane Katrina, because of course we know it was a devastating situation, and I noticed that there was not as much conversation about how people were going to regroup. What happens when there's forced immigration or forced migration, especially around a traumatic event? And I had started seeing lots and lots of folks from the Gulf talk about the ways in which the food of the Gulf, they would travel back right, to get food from the garden. And so that led me to think about the ways in which trauma operates in our bodies and how we carry those traumas with us, and that they inform what, when, where, and how we eat as well. From sustaining ourselves culturally when we move, to accessing food, to the foods we have access to the myriad decisions we make on a daily basis about food. Like literally, all of us go through at least 50 questions a day, whether you're cognizant of it or not. And the ways in which those things play out in the world. And so what they were talking about, I'll just say very quickly, is the crooked chair. Melissa Harris Perry, who used to have the Melissa Harris Perry show at MSNBC, has written a book on shame. And one of the examples she gives, a sociological example, is how a person can believe that they are in a chair that's crooked, unrealizing that it's actually not the chair that's crooked, it's the room. And so you will never be able to balance your chair in the crooked room. And that's partly how trauma works. America is not built and designed for us, even though it was built and designed by us as Black people. And so when we try to conform to standards of beauty and to other normalized cultural acts, those cultural acts were not designed with us in mind. So we're going to always be off kilter. No matter how hard you work and strive, you're not going to meet the acceptance of white America because it's not designed for you to operate within that system. Hence the reason I talked about also food shaming being a form of anti-Black racism.
All right, excellent question. So if we're talking about trauma in the book, I kind of use it as a foundation to, launch everything. But using my personal story, I started with my family because that's where it always starts. That's the inception of everything, right? So for my family, where trauma comes in, my parents are immigrants. They're Nigerian immigrants, so they have their own shit that they dealt with trying to get here. And I understand that, but a lot of their trauma, right, their anger, they took it out on us, displaced anger, right? So, for my parents, my root of trauma with them and what they used to target me was the fact that, I was fat and that's also where like food shaming comes in too, which is excellent point. So even though my parents are very proud of their cultural foods, they shame themselves as well. So it's one of those things where they antagonized me for eating their food, but they didn't consider their food healthy. Even though with Nigerian diets, the nutrition is still very comprehensive, right? It's a little starchy sometimes, but starch is not bad. That's the other thing too, like trying to refer to food as bad or good is not good. Because then you're assigning, moral value to the food on your plate, which is again not good. So yeah, they shamed me for stuff like that. So then I ended up walking away with very traumatic, associations with food. But even my own cultural food, like I couldn't really eat it, even though that's what I was raised on. So then you get, by the time you get to the passage of me like just being really unhinged about food, I don't even mention any of my cultural food in that passage. It's just like the chicken and I don't know if y'all remember the 100 pack like powdered snacks, like the Oreos and the chips. I'm glad they eventually got rid of it, but I like sustained myself for a long time on those things. So yeah, food shame was kind of the origin of a lot of my issues with food in my body. And yeah, again, got it from my initial family home, and it's something I still kind of carry with me. Still doing and learning. That's the other thing they don't tell you about. It's a lifelong process to, repair your relationship with your body and food. But at the end of the day, food is just, it's here to sustain you. It's delicious. It's one of the few things in this life that make it worth existing in this plane. So the fact that we really try to add really negative connotations to food makes me sad.
Sorry. I know you also mentioned some experiences.
Still can't hear you.
like
Have fun,
I know you also mentioned in your book that we won't go into, but also that shame that came from your religious community as well. And then Psyche, you talk about the, what's the word you use?
Sacralization.
Sacralization. Yeah, and so that sort of moralization. I appreciate you all. Psyche, in a part of your book, I mean, power is mentioned throughout the book. I almost wanted to count how many times so I could come here today and say, you mentioned power, but I didn't. But you talk about power so much in your book, in food and culture and society. And there was this quote that is, this is one of the ways that power is invisible but deadly to your psyche. Can you talk a little bit more about power?
Right, well, I just had to bring that home, that power, all of this is done. And honestly, because people disbelieve it, the ways in which, so I'm trained to study the material world, right? How we interact with objects, right? It's called material culture. So I study clothing, place and space, music, hair, but mostly for me, I study food. And power is inherent in objects. And it's inherent because we give power to objects. You don't think so? If we were to ask you all to all give us your cell phones, when we enter, people would go into an absolute panic. It may not be outward, but it would be in, because we're so attached to our phones. Our children, our families, our places of employment, our houses of worship, right? So things have power because we give them the power to define who we are. Oh, are you an iPhone user? Oh, you're a Mercedes driver? Oh, are you a vegetarian, vegan, whatever, right? So our identity is tied into things, as you were just saying, right? The food of your culture, and which can be a double-edged sword. And so I wanted to make it clear of the various ways in which power is invisible, right? It's exercised not always over, but sometimes in negotiation, right? As you negotiate, for example, what you're going to eat in a day's time. So here's an example of how I start the book with power without saying, right? My Eating While Black starts with an incident that happened in D.C. in 2019, where a Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Transit Authority worker was photographed while in uniform eating while riding on the metro. And she was photographed by a woman named Natasha Times, who was also a passenger on the train. She took a photo and tweeted. Okay, so she took a photo of this woman. And then she had this comment, and I'm quoting her. When you're on your morning commute and see at WMATA, acronym, employee in uniform, all caps, eating on the train, I thought we were not allowed to eat on the train. This is unacceptable. Hope at WMATA responds. Okay, so where's the power? Why are you taking a picture of this person who's on their way or perhaps moving from one job to the next, who is minding their business? Right, and in fact, what was her goal, Natasha Times' goal, right? To shame this woman, all right? And so she said, when I asked the employee about this, her response was, worry about yourself. Exactly what she should have said. So that, in that instance, is the power over, but it's also the power negotiated through words and actions. As it turns out, that a memo had gone out earlier, about a day or two earlier, saying that WMATA Transit no longer would be fining people for eating or playing music or doing these other things on the train. So the WMATA employee knew exactly what she was doing with her business. Natasha Times did not. So we look at how power, again, in its most insidious form, gets activated by people on a daily basis just in picking up the phone to call who you think is an authority on me or you or you. So that's one thing.
Thank you. Clarkisha, in a section of your book, you refer to the experience of seeing Lizzo, who said her cousin told her that fat girls should not have short hair. And so we said hair is one of the many ways to absorb heavier blows of fat phobia, anti-Blackness, and colorism. If you expand on that and talk about in society how we are taught as individuals to absorb oppression in our
So in that passage, I'm talking about like how there's a respectability aspect to hair, right? Many of you know, especially for Black women here who went on your own natural hair journey, you know how ugly it can get, especially if you're 4C, 4A, 4D girl, right? Because your curl pattern is not the desirable curl pattern, right? It's too nappy, it's too messy, right? It's not the nice, springy, boingy curls of some of these other women, right? So for me, you know, come back from dark skin, again, I was facing a particular type of like antagonization, not just from my family, but within my church, right? So there was only so much I could do besides losing the weight, like I mentioned in the book. So for me, I found out very quickly through just observing certain elders and how they spoke to us based on how our hair looked, that like if I made sure my hair was nice and permed, right, if I made sure it was nice and straight, then they would overlook a lot that was wrong with me, including me being fat. So again, wrong lesson to take away, because the adults are wrong in a situation, but you know, in order for me to survive in the moment, that's what I did. So I was very appreciative of Lizzo saying what she said in that interview, because that comment was actually made to her by one of her family members. Like her family is telling her as a fat person she can't have short hair, because the implication is that it won't look good, or it'll not hide the fact that she's fat, or it'll maybe highlight the fact that she's fat, right? So that's what I was thinking about when she said that, so I thought it was important to make that connection myself. Because indeed, when my hair was nice and long, and straight and permed, I found that I wasn't, you know, derided as much or disrespected much in these like holy spaces. So, yeah.
I know we're not at that stage yet, but I want to comment on this, okay? Because this is an example of what I mean by the crooked room and the crooked chair, right? That's a mentality of colonization, right? And Nigeria was colonized, right? And so that colonized line remains even after you've obtained your freedom, if you will, right? And so there's a whole process of decolonization that we have to do to not center this notion of a particular standard of beauty that will allow you to be accepted in American society, right? Or the world, actually, right? Because this is not restricted to the U.S. This is global, right? You can go back as far and earlier than Sarge Bartman, right? In the movie called The Hottentot Venus, and because she had large breasts, large buttocks, etc., she was therefore considered a specimen to be placed on display. So these are long-standing narratives that we're talking about undoing. This isn't something that came up in the last, year or two, right? These are deep-seated types of ways of thinking. So that's what I mean by the crooked room and the crooked chair metaphor. It's also a display of power, of cultural and genderized power.
I could talk to both of you all day. I don't even have one question. But the audience also maybe has questions, so we're going to open up for any audience Q&A if you all have questions. And there's someone, I believe, who has a microphone.
So the question was, do either of us address the issue of health and weight, and if so, how? You go for it.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of part of what the book is about too. The idea of health and weight being very arbitrary, because healthy to whom? Like when you say healthy, what do you mean, right? That's why I made a connection to my cultural food. My cultural food is delicious, and there are healthy nutrition aspects to it. But again, as Dr. Psyche keeps saying, like because of that colonial mindset that my people still have, they're viewing their own foods as toxic to them, right? In terms of weight, I do mention that. I mentioned throughout the book how yo-yo dieting, they use that, I'll mention it again. And my weight throughout the book fluctuates. And based on my weight fluctuation, that will kind of determine my mindset at the time in terms of how depressed I was, right? How sad I was, how happy I was. And, eventually, my most happy coincided with my largest weight. So it's always important to think about stuff like that. Like, are you actually happy at this size, or are you thinking that you're supposed to be happy at the size that you are?
Great, thank you. So, yes, and one of the things you have to recognize is science has had a complete, almost stranglehold on this conversation. And it has been somewhat flawed. Okay, there are studies that have indicated BMI is not a good assessment of one's healthy weight. You can Google that at any time, you'll find all kinds of scientists who did studies that you probably know. Right. It racialized, the science is racialized. The other thing is we've not done enough to incorporate culture. Anyone can see that all of us have different body types, different body structures, different body genetics. And so back to Clarkisha's point, how we understand health is really between a person and their physician. I'll give you a case in point. I had a really good friend who was with me in graduate school, and I use this example a lot. She was with me in graduate school, vegetarian the whole time on the East Coast. Years later, she was older, and she was living in the Southwest. And she was telling my daughter and me that she had an experience of just being lethargic and sick the entire time she got to the Southwest. Finally, her doctor said, I know you don't want to hear this, but I just need you to try some red meat. And she's so vehement that she wouldn't do it, but she did. Almost within weeks, her whole body tight. The lethargy was gone, the fatigue was gone. So again, region plays a difference, soil everywhere plays a difference, and so the push here, from my point of view, is this is part of why we can't shame people around food, because you don't know what folks are grappling with, right? You could say, oh, this person's a picture of health, and they're on medication for, I don't know, hepatitis, who knows what the case may be. And so all of us are very different, hence the reason again that we need to stop with the shaming and telling other people you're unhealthy. Lizzo is probably healthier than every one of us in this room. To be able to perform a concert nonstop and dance and play a flute and play other instruments, who's got excessive cardiovascular strength, right? Well, who knows, maybe she's on medication that keeps her with some excess pounds on her, right? She can grapple with depression or other aspects of mental health. Who knows? But the consistent need to try and shape and mold and contort and flip and so forth, again, for a system in a society that's not going to accept you or then either way, does have a deleterious effect on our minds.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rowe. I am a nutritionist. So health and weight are really important to me in the work that I do. But I will, and first of all, I just want to say, I never dreamed that I would be able to have this conversation, to be privy to this conversation. So bravo to you both for the work that you've done and the work that you're doing. For my it's really important work. So much so that for my clients who I coach through emotional eating and trauma related to emotional eating, I'm more concerned about what's eating them rather than what they're eating. And I think if we could get to the point where we start there, you know, we can move people forward, you know, in their lives, in all aspects of their lives. So, again, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thank you both for being here. And I really appreciate those last comments as well. And just briefly, I come from the world of pediatrics, and there's a lot of work that we are trying to do or undo in terms of the way that we talk about children, with and about children and their growth and their weight. And I think there's a lot of trauma that can happen inadvertently in healthcare settings. So I appreciate both of y'all leading this conversation. I wanted to ask about writing process, and specifically for Clarkisha, writing a book that is very much memoir, but also brings in fact and nonfiction outside of your own experience. What was that process like? I'm curious specifically, did you start with kind of memoir type personal pieces first and then bring in the cultural and the fact aspects, or vice versa? So how did the book come about? And also, what was it like to write about such deep and kind of traumatic experiences, especially when they involve family and other loved ones who may be reading the book at some point?
We're laughing because that was one of the questions that the moderator had as well.
We were talking. So thank you for your question, very thoughtful. I actually initially wanted to write the memoir, or write it this way anyway, because I'm very private. I know my, online internet persona seems different, but very private, don't like to do my business, so very difficult. But my agent encouraged it because it's gonna kind of get my feet wet in publishing. And I eventually want to go on and do other stuff like write a Western, write a romance, that kind of thing. So I started with actually anecdotes about my love life. Because I thought it'd be a little bit more juicier, so to speak, juicier, attract people to the book, but also give them something to relate to. Because love and sex can be very awkward, so I thought it'd be just nice to start there. Because it's a very equalizing experience for all of us, right? So that's where I started, and then I kind of moved over to more personal stories about my upbringing, because that's the foundation, right? That's where I got all these very unhealthy beliefs about food and exercise. And then from there, then we got into the fat phobic message, and then bringing in some anecdotal evidence that supported kind of prevailing theories out there. It was difficult to write, very difficult, because throughout the process, there are memories that I thought I had kind of put to bed that popped up. And then if they popped up, they went in the book, because I wanted to be honest. And the way that memoirs are used, generally kind of dishonest, right? Even though the genre calls for more honesty, it's a memoir. It's not a biography, right? The biography can be more detached. So, yeah, I try to be as honest as possible, because otherwise, what is the point of memoir, right? So, yeah, that's kind of my process with it. I was blessed to have a therapist and a psychiatrist at the time. So whenever I found myself in a really deep, dark memory, I could call them and be like, so do you have space on your schedule this week for me? So that's kind of how the process went. And I'm glad it's here, because it took a minute to write, but yeah.
And I just want to comment as well, because in our field, we call it is memoir, but it's also self-ethnography, where we're telling our own story. And I do have to shout out my daughter who travels with me, my 19-year-old college student. And she's my bestie and my confidant. And I say that because there's a part in the book, because I also tell this through stories, the stories of my experience having traveled to talk about my first book. But there's a story I tell in the book about my daughter when she was in elementary school. And I'm telling this story because she told the story publicly of being in elementary school, and your gym teacher had all the kids get on the scale and then read their weight aloud. And then I wanted to tell them most of you will not make it to high school because you're going to die of obesity. And it was a very traumatizing story. Her dad was Ghanaian. And so, you know, the story of taking dynamic food to school and then having kids, you know, through the whole, you know, which a lot of cultures experience, right? All of that kind of stuff, which starts at home. It starts at home. Teach your children that there are different cultures other than yours, who have foods that are going to look different from yours, who may smell different, which may taste different from yours, but it doesn't make them any less than or better than you. It makes them different, right? And so when we do these trite, you know, statements about honor difference, etc., understand what that really means. We are all different, even in your own household. You married too, if you're partnered up, you're with someone from a different culture. I don't care if they look like you. If they didn't grow up in the same house as you and experience the same things as you and be you, then they're a different cultural person, right, or cultural being. And so that starts at home, this kind of shaming people. And we all do it. I talk about that in the book as well, about my own painful experience of being with my best friend and finding out how badly we shamed the foods from her food, from her culture, which was New Orleans. So I'm just going to end really quickly my portion of this with the statement that I wanted to read from the book, and certainly you all can do this as you will. So I start, in the very last paragraph of the book says, from this standpoint, and that's the standpoint of acknowledging and taking into consideration the fact that food has many meanings and it operates differently in people's lives. I say from this standpoint, it's imperative that we begin seeing Black people as resilient, always already living with and resisting trauma, with full bodies that may move in many different ways throughout the world. Begin valuing Black people by not seeing us as unruly or always in need of taming and controlling, but as capable, fully capable as anyone else, contributing to all aspects of society, from the kitchen to the boardroom. Change the perceptions that fuel beliefs that wholeness and health are not in the interest of Black communities, because wholeness and health are at the center of Black communities. This is misguided, and it's a wrong belief, and it propels people in no small part to surveil and try to control. We do not need this. Consider instead that when our bodies are saddled with extra fat and or dis-ease, it may well be that we are exacerbated by life, by systems and structures that have taken away our breath for the moment. It's not necessary that our kitchens are unhealthy, it's that our souls are weary and we need a second to regroup. And when we present ourselves as food professionals, know that we are most likely capable of creating more than just soul food, traditional or modern. Though we have shared histories, we are not monolithic, nor are we one-dimensional. We are a community of people filled with as many densities, destinies, and desires as anyone else. And when you are inclined to worry about us in the workplace, at school, in our houses of worship, or anywhere else, ask us first what we want, what we know, who we are. Otherwise, worry about yourself.
Buy the books, you can get the authors to autograph your books, sign them, and then there is also 2 months in the back. Thank you all.